Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to see exactly how a seemingly simple, run-of-the-mill farming mechanic acts as this brilliant Trojan horse for a deeply profound philosophical discourse on human evolution. What starts as a standard game mechanic in the world of Excalibur rapidly expands into an epic exploration of mythology and theology. It's honestly mind-blowing. Let's see how this text seamlessly bridges the massive gap between planting digital crops and the literal forging of mankind. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to kick things off with Level 3 Sustensian farming, then we'll decode the Leo system, explore zodiacs and family symbols, tackle the paradox of Eden, and finally, bring it all home with forging mankind through alloys. All right, Section 1, Level 3 Subsistence Farming. Let's take a look at how our characters are forced to adapt from simple hunting to planting roots. And we're talking both literally and metaphorically here.
So, picture this. In the world of Excalibur, our characters have just successfully completed the hunting and gathering level. Up until this point, they've been surviving purely by observing wildlife through what the game calls the Liber system. They'd find edible plants, forage, and bring the fruits back to camp. But eventually, that is simply no longer enough. The stakes are getting much, much higher. You can't just forage forever when the families are growing, right? To conserve their collective mental fortitude and keep their collective MP above that absolutely crucial 80% mark, Kieran steps up to take on the farming role while his partner Concordia rests. What's so cool about this phase is how perfectly it mimics real human history, where our early ancestors were essentially forced to develop subsistence farming because hunting and gathering just couldn't sustain their growing family groups anymore.
And then, boom, the exact moment this shift happens, they get a notification. They have officially entered the third level, the subsistence farming phase. But of course, there's a catch. The notification pops up and reads, "It's all well and good to cultivate, however, some crops yield a bigger harvest." And with that single prompt, it unlocks a mysterious new skill named Leo. Now, this isn't just some random game unlock to make things easier. It represents a fundamental ground-up shift in how the characters must interact with their environment if they actually want to survive.
Moving right along to Section 2, Decoding the Leo system. It is absolutely fascinating how these specific game mechanics map so flawlessly onto real-world agricultural principles.
The narrator and Ciela suddenly have this light bulb moment. They realize that the Leo system is fundamentally different from the tools they've been using. While their old Liber system utilized a horizontal scale to track animal feeding habits, the Leo system introduces a brand new vertical scale. And this scale is perfectly split right at a marker called ground level. The system actually measures the degree of support a particular crop can provide based entirely on where the harvest is stored. If the meter dips below ground level, well, that means the plant stores its fruits underground, like a tuber. But if the meter goes above ground level, the plant stores its fruits above the surface, like a bulb. And the further that meter pushes in either direction, the greater the support that crop is going to provide for the family.
To truly wrap their heads around how this works, the characters literally map out the fundamental energy cycle of life. They recognize that all forms of life ultimately derive their energy from the sun, but they all manage it in completely different ways. Green plants channel elements from the air and ground, processing their food through photosynthesis. And if you think about it, the fruits we eat are actually just the natural storage facilities for those processed elements. The characters also realize they've got to consider different root systems now, like tap roots that plunge deep down to the bedrock, versus fibrous root systems that spread outward like a complex mesh. By mastering the Leo system, they can measure the average period of time until harvest, which lets them completely optimize their planting strategy. It's just this brilliant reminder of how deeply interconnected our own real-world ecosystems are.
Which brings us to Section 3, Zodiacs and Family Symbols. Let's see how this narrative builds from the literal roots in the ground to the deeply metaphorical roots of a family tree. So the crucial takeaway here is that the Leo skill isn't merely an agricultural tool. It is a direct, deliberate nod to Kieran's own family symbol. Kieran explains that a group of lions is called a pride, sure, but for lions, that pride actually symbolizes family. The lions guard the territory while the lionesses do the vast majority of the hunting. But Kieran's lineage gets even more complex. His mother's side features a crest with a sword severing a chain, which specifically represents the severing of the chains binding light, alongside a dragon. And according to the Chinese zodiac integrated into the lore, the dragon wields the power of combustion, which directly corresponds to the element of fortitude. And what's incredibly cool about the world building here is that fortitude is the only element, alongside light, that is actually capable of directly nullifying the effects of darkness.
Now, Concordia's lineage, it is equally dense and fascinating. On her father's side, the symbol is the hound.
Hounds are renowned for their heightened senses, so naturally this symbolizes instinct. But her mother's side features this beautiful, almost mathematical equation. Her symbol is the pendragon. The text breaks this down literally. The pen symbolizes intellect, and the dragon symbolizes fortitude. When you combine intellect and fortitude, you get the exact connotation for true wisdom. Furthermore, instead of inheriting something standard like the Excalibur, Concordia's mother inherited the Bow of Orion, which is a mystical weapon granted the specific power to slay terrible foes.
As you can see in the source text, Excalibur isn't messing around with its lore. The backstory dictates that the characters' progress throughout the game will be shaped directly by their unique sets of beliefs. These family crests, instinct on one hand, wisdom on the other, family, and fortitude, they aren't just cosmetic flavor text to make the characters look cool. They are the foundational beliefs that will heavily guide their technological advancement as they push through the various phases of civilization.
Section 4. The Paradox of Eden. This is where we make a massive, unexpected theological pivot as Concordia delivers a profound lecture out in the middle of the desert. As the characters are out exploring the concept of the Leo constellation, Concordia just drops this massive breakdown of the book of Genesis. She explains the concept of limit breaks being achieved through force enhancers or amplifiers. She notes that in ancient myths, the term carpenter actually originally meant an engineer who was chosen to protect the family and the motherland. But the real core of her lecture focuses on the differences between man and woman. She points out that because man was created directly from the earth and woman was created from a rib taken from the sleeping man, they possess completely different fundamental essences. Man essentially acts as an intermediary to the earth. Woman, on the other hand, which is indirectly hinted at by her eating first from the tree of knowledge, matures faster. They have vastly different essential vulnerabilities and strengths, but because they both trace their genealogy back to the exact same earth, they are fundamentally just two pieces of one larger puzzle.
Concordia then points out something so profound about the core tragedy of Eden. Mankind's inherent desire to become like God. It's actually a completely pure desire. The problem wasn't the goal, the problem was their methodology. This quote right here perfectly highlights the core paradoxical irony of Eden. Think about it. What mankind sought was always right there in the garden with them, God himself. Had they simply found the courage to ask, they could have had all the answers they were looking for. Instead, in their frantic quest to become like God, they cast him away, literally throwing away the exact thing they were seeking in the first place.
And this natural consequence of Eden leads us into something completely unexpected, and honestly pretty hilarious. A metaphor about the Promethean legend of stolen fire, and what the text colorfully describes as divine cooking.
Because mankind showed such incredible naivety and the sheer inability to differentiate edible food from literal poison in Eden, they proved they were far from wise. So God essentially puts on an apron and acts as a chef. He begins a long, arduous process of grilling or interrogation. Mankind is basically slapped onto a grid of iron, acting as raw meat. God then applies controlled heat, using the vast, brutal length of history as the spices to season humanity. I know, it's a completely wild image, but it represents a harsh process specifically designed to ingrain the lessons they failed to learn back in Eden. The whole point is to transform them from a state of raw vulnerability into a refined state where they can finally process poisonous substances into something genuinely edible.
Finally, Section 5. Forging mankind through alloys. This intense grilling process ultimately forces mankind to recognize the inherent imperfections of their own base elements.
Concordia points out a brilliant little linguistic Easter egg hidden inside this grill motif. The scientific word for iron is ferrum. In the lore of the game, this is broken down playfully into fur, which sounds like justice, and rum, the wine pirates drink. Therefore, ferrum transliterates to a drunken application of justice, which is exactly why it's a material so prone to rust. By mocking iron in this way, God is humorously capitalizing on mankind's pride. He purposefully bruises their ego just enough to stir up a problem-solving spirit within them. After all, nobody wants to be grilled on rusty iron, right? So they are forced to strive for greatness and forge a far better material like stainless steel, which beautifully symbolizes the act of cleansing one's hands of injustice.
And this whole idea perfectly illustrates the concept of alloys and limit breaks. Mankind discovers that the elements in their possession are always falling short of at least one desirable quality. But by fusing flawed base elements together, they can create something totally superior. We see this everywhere. We see it in metallurgy with the creation of alloys, we see it in agriculture through grafting vines to eliminate crop vulnerabilities, and most importantly, we see it in humanity. When a man and a woman unite, they actively seek out desirable qualities in each other that they themselves lack. You literally cannot fuse two identical jigsaw pieces together. It just doesn't work. But two pieces that have exactly what the other lacks, they fuse perfectly. This symbiosis creates a child that is a much more complete piece of the puzzle, successfully forging a superior next generation.
To really drive this cooking metaphor home, the text applies it to the oldest sibling rivalry in the book, the story of Cain and Abel. When God rejects Cain's sacrifice, he warns Cain to keep his anger in check. The text frames this as God literally telling Cain to put a lid on the bubbling cauldron of his rage. But Cain lacks any sense of moderation. He completely disregards the warning and chooses to overheat Abel instead. The tragic result is that the liquid of Abel's blood vaporizes into heaven, demanding a fiery vengeance, while Cain's own pot is left completely, irreparably charred. It's a striking visual representation of a massive failure of temperature control. It shows exactly what happens when a base element stubbornly refuses to be properly refined on the grill of history.
The pure brilliance of this source text is how it manages to scale from a simple, ground-level farming mechanic, measuring where a crop stores its energy, all the way up to the grand spiritual evolution of humanity through the fires of history. So, as you reflect on this explainer today, ask yourself, what vulnerabilities do you possess in your own base elements? And more importantly, what missing pieces might you need to fuse with in order to forge your own ultimate limit break? That's all we have for this explainer. Keep seeking out those superior alloys, and I'll catch you next time.